Hello, I'm Steve. A little about myself. I'm a retired law enforcement officer with 20 years of service. I began my career in the jail, worked the road, and became an investigator. During my career, my training consisted of everything from SWAT to becoming a state certified crime scene technician. I've investigated crimes from thefts to homicides. After retiring and becoming aware of true crime and web sleuths, I started my channel for web sleuths to better understand the perspectives of law enforcement. Not only do we cover true crime, I go out into the field and assist families who have lost loved ones to homicide and their cases are considered cold. Join me as we look and bring attention to these critical cases.
Hello, everyone. Glad you're able to join us tonight. If you're new to the channel, thank you for being here. Welcome. And while you're in chat, be mindful to be respectful of families, mods, and each other. And Mrs. Steve is in Florida. I'm back up here in Georgia. Had a long day of travel. But anyway, tonight we're going to be talking about a homicide. And as we go through these cases and everything, be respectful of the families, and there's going to be other people and persons of interest that might be involved in these stories. We'll talk about and only mention those that law enforcement currently has warrants or search warrants addressing those individuals. So all the other names and things we won't put out there are their initials. I appreciate that. But anyway, with that getting said, I want to thank y'all for being here, and let's get into this. Of course, we're talking about a homicide that occurred in San Antonio of Savannah Soto and Matthew Guerra that went missing, reported missing just right before Christmas. And then tragically, they were found victims of a homicide abandoned in a housing area. But since then, law enforcement had an active investigation, moved along from what I saw of the investigations and the some of the coverage of it and the news releases and seeing where the location was and anticipating what some of their strategy was as far as releasing a limited video and announcing that we're looking for two persons of interest. When you watch the video, you know that others are also involved because there's more movement than just from two persons of interest. And so why would law enforcement do certain things like that? And of course, we'll talk about that in some future shows and things. But tonight, we really want to talk about that since they've made the arrest in this case of two offenders that, and we have these offenders that are talking that, with the release of the affidavit and certain information contained in it, that we'll be able to look at it from the CSI perspective and see is what the offender telling us going to line up with what the evidence from the crime scene tells us, because there's a lot of things that offenders think that they can just tell their side of the story and not realizing that the victim's story is within the evidence and is within whatever type of injuries that they experience, the locations of the victims, positioning, types of injuries, entrance wounds, proximity of if a firearm was used, as in this case, the proximity of that firearm, where are the shell casings, what type of firearms, a lot of stuff that can be covered in the CSI. And with that, I will be probably doing some CSI recreation of showing some of the things that we're going to be discussing tonight. But anyway, we'll get into it and we'll look at these individuals. But San Antonio police said that the critical piece of evidence that led to the suspects was one of the victim's cell phone in the vehicle when they discovered being Soto's, that the phone had recently searched the suspect's address on Google Maps, where investigators spotted the vehicle, and that was seen in that video that they had shared in December. And that's we spoke about some of that in my other show that I had on Tuesday night. I just didn't realize, and it brought up a great point of that sometimes the offenders, while they may take the one phone or but they don't realize that even when you take that phone, I mean, how many of you out there share um, what your itinerary for the day is with your family, or you might have that, oh, I'm going over so and so's house in a little bit, and you'll forget about those second devices that and you don't have any control of being able to find them, locate them, secure them, and destroy them, because you just, in this modern day way people communicate, that occurs. And fortunately for law enforcement, it did come out that they were able to use some of that technology and found a phone and was able to do some um, um, discoveries from within that information. And of course, the geofencing, I don't know what all will be used in this case as it moves forward, but we'll look forward to it as that information is released. And it will be, I'm sure, volumes of data that will be in this case as we move forward. But we got suspects that are talking. And when you have suspects that are talking, um, there's two reasons, mostly the reasons they want to share what their version of the events are. Doesn't mean their version is true. You'll see it across the board. I've done thousands of interviews, and always the offender has their version, the victims have their version, and the evidence, of course, supports one or the other. And but anyway, let's see if anything, as y'all go into chat and everything, if you have any questions, just throw it in there, and I'll try to get to it as we go. Like I said, Mrs. Steve is in Florida tonight, so we'll be able to. I won't be able to run as smoothly as normal, but yes, wow, they got these guys quick. And from what I saw, I like I said, I didn't see law enforcement that was in a panic. I saw that they released something that had a strategy to it, and when you want two persons of interest, and you know that there's others possibly involved due to that tile movement, that they're giving outs to others that, hey, we know you witnessed this. Come forward. This is your chance. And so plus it turned out that, of course, that the location of where the victims were abandoned and dumped was extremely close to where the orbit of all the individuals lived and resided and interacted in that community. So it wasn't going to be like it was someone just passing through on the interstate system. So it was a very quick arrest, and I'm glad to see that. All right. Good to see everybody in here tonight. Like I said, I apologize that Mrs. Steve isn't with us tonight, but we'll do the best that we can. And let's see here. All right. Okay. So now let's go back to another slide. But anyway, the latest news briefing by the law enforcement, the sergeant told reporters during a late night news conference that Soto's phone collected at the scene proved key in the authorities' investigation. The officers were able to pinpoint a possible location of the suspect's vehicle thanks to video collected from nearby security cameras. And we see that so often now. There's so much technology out there that if you commit something in a community, it's guaranteed that there's so many devices out there, from Wi-Fi's to security cameras to ring door cameras, that it's hard to not be seen from even the security systems at service stations, restaurants, parking lots. That when you travel, even the intersections, red light cams, traffic cams, there's so much that they're able to track individuals now. And so you're going to see a lot of this from this point on, that when crimes occur, if it's by any type of road surface, law enforcement is going to use those technologies. But anyway, but when they, as law enforcement found the cameras and released that during the manhunt, and then they were able to travel to a home, they linked to a vehicle that was met by the elder offender. Both he and his son were interviewed. Detective says the deaths were related to a narcotics deal that went bad. We had discussed that regardless of what activities they were involved in their communities, they did not deserve this. The dealer himself his girlfriend, Savannah, and then their absolutely unborn child, which is absolutely I mean, it's just as unbelievable and horrible as you can ever imagine of what can happen out there and risk that people put themselves at and their children and unborn children. So it's absolutely terrible. But as we discussed, we thought that the deaths had occurred somewhere else and that they had transitioned over and moved to this other neighborhood, and where the bodies were left in the vehicle, and but that each of them died from gunshot wounds to the head, which is extremely important, and that's going to play a huge part as this trial moves forward, as we go through the court system, or if it ever gets to a trial, for the fact that gunshot wounds to the head and any type of gunshot wound, uh, regardless of the type of weapon that's fired, there's a lot of evidence that can be determined. The distances of that firearm away from the skin, from the hair, is going to play a huge role in this. And it already has played a role in it, for the fact that in the affidavit, it's noted by law enforcement that the offender's story doesn't line up with where the shell spent casings are found and the type of injuries. I think there's going to be a huge role in this, but we'll see as we understand more about the those injuries and what has been referenced by law enforcement, how true and accurate those first descriptors were. So we'll just have to see where it will go from that. But of course, the vehicles meet up, and this is one of the key parts that we've looked at and has been viewed by thousands and thousands of people. Well, millions of people around the world have looked at this thing and looked at this vehicle and seeing the situation of that. Absolutely, two vehicles meet up in the middle of the night. There's a reason for that. And we now understand with hindsight exactly that it was due to communications. The father admitted that his son had contacted him. And so through those communications, it will play a huge part in the court systems. And then I think in the affidavit it also says that the vehicles followed him over there to where the vehicle was finally left. But anyway, we have the title exchange. But this is one of the individuals Ramon is about as good as I can get out of that name. I haven't I tried to pronounce the last name, and so won't be doing that. But anyway, he admitted to the detectives that he drove the pickup to the apartment complex to meet his son, which means there's a lot of things whenever they talk about certain words and what the words and the usage of it is that he went over there to meet his son. His son has called him, told him whatever he's told him, and brought him in here. And this interaction is seen on the surveillance videos, and that he identified himself that that's him, that he got out of the truck, surveyed the situation, and as we discussed on Tuesday night, that when he surveyed the situation, he knew some of the details because as we spoke about, that he wasn't in a panic. He knew something had happened, and so he wasn't in total shock. That, of course, we don't have the close-up view of his facial. We don't have the audio of what might have been said. But anyway, he was charged with the abuse of a corpse, and which is a misdemeanor there in Texas. And evidently he's cooperated since the first moments law enforcement has made contact with him, because they said when he answered the door, yeah, I know why you're here. And so it's, for whatever reason, he just didn't make the phone call to call him, come on over. But law enforcement will look at that. The courts will look at that. And so will we ever see this going to court? I don't know. It depends on what the DA works out with what type of charges and how far they'll go with it and how far is the family willing to work with everybody. But of course, this is Christopher, who is the one that pulled the triggers from what law enforcement has stated, and from his own part of the affidavit of making certain statements that he manipulated the gun when the shots were fired, striking one victim and then manipulating it again. Is that meaning that they were fighting over the gun? And which the evidence on the scene will cover a lot of that, and we'll have to look at that and see exactly how accurate that is. All right, let's see. Before I go on, let's see how far behind I am, guys. If you got any questions, just throw them out there. But we're going to be looking at some of the gunshot residue and stuff here shortly, and how important that's going to play in this role. All right. I appreciate everybody being here tonight. Oh, man. Molly says that the dad was not charged with accessory, just abuse of. Any thoughts on that? Yes, like I said, from his cooperation from the moment that contact was made. Now, does that mean other things can't come up in the future? Absolutely, they can't. We just don't know which way the DA will take it as they evaluate and other involvement of people. But yes, the handling of the towel. And is that going to be another family member, or is that going to be acquaintance, friend? I'm sure all of that is known by law enforcement, and they have chosen to focus on these two POIs, or now, of course, offenders that have been charged. Yeah, on Facebook, there's a lot of stuff going on there. Lone Pony says, I'm surprised the neighbors didn't call in that truck knowing his size, and especially since he wasn't even hiding. Probably, and like I said, I'm sure that within the culture that some of the neighbors probably did. Law enforcement probably has a list of that, because I'm sure that there are people that absolutely called in him and other people meeting that physical description. But when you have the combination of that model truck, that type of truck, and that size of an individual, that I'm sure law enforcement had some tip in, although it appears that they didn't need it, but it's hopefully the community did step up. I don't know where Purdue RN is. I've got to check on that. That's a good question. All right. Gail Hurd has gifted 1 True Crime Web membership. Thank you. Appreciate that. And Bama Sin has been a member for 8 months. We appreciate that. Time flies when you spend it with the TCW family. Thank you. That's very nice and kind of you. Yes, CJK, I agree with you. Absolutely. There's probably, and they'll probably continue to come in and different reasons, and as people become involved in this. But I'm glad that it has been resolved to this point. I hope I don't miss anybody here. Emerson, happy anniversary. Thank you. Yes, and this is something that we're going to be looking at and talking about tonight, particularly about how you'll do a visual assessment of that type of wound and characteristics of, and I will probably do some CSI work on this in the coming days, and try to some of the recreation to see how to better explain how law enforcement and the CSI will be able to, uh, as they've stated in that affidavit of making certain claims, that his story doesn't line up with the evidence, and that would be the finding points as DA goes forward with this. All right. But anyway, this is where we get into when right before that, or part of the affidavit, where Christopher said that Guerra pointed a gun at him, and he was able to manipulate the weapon, resulting in Soto being shot. So there was some type of struggle. And can people get shot with a gun being discharged? Yes, I've seen it time after time after time. Of that, when that round goes off until it strikes something, sometimes it's another individual. That, yes, it can happen, but we'll have to see what type of firearm it is. Because they say the shell casings were found within the vehicle. Are those shell casings from this firearm? Are they in an area that would uh, show the ejection of a spent fire being discharged in the vehicle or outside the vehicle? His story is starting from when you read the affidavit, from happening outside. Well, if it happened outside, can spent casings get in a vehicle? Absolutely. Doors open, windows open, things like that can happen. But where are and there's more to that gunshot trajectory, that gunshot residue, gunshot back spatter, because a lot of things happen. And if those gunshot injuries occurred inside that vehicle, they're going to be able to find a lot of different back spatter and other gunshot residue that if the gun was fired in a certain position or a certain distance and within a certain environment, it just that all that evidence is just not collected on the human body. It can be collected on the interior parts of that vehicle, headrests, seats, door panels. All that will tell a tale. And so it's more than just what, when CSI process that vehicle, of finding the gunshot residue on a victim. It's what's within that, inside that vehicle. Now, if they are unable to locate other gunshot residue or stuff, then they'll have to evaluate and see what that story and what that evidence tells them. But anyway, after Soto had been hit, moments later, Guerrero once again pointed the gun back at Chris, and he once again was able to manipulate the weapon, and with Guerrero being shot. And so he places himself as the sole offender in the case, and said that his father only helped him hide the bodies, and that in this affidavit, Christopher also said he drove the vehicle to apartment complex, and where he met with his father, and also abandoned the victims. And when you read the affidavit, of course, this is where law enforcement tells you that there's something doesn't line up with what the offender, and that's going to be one of the reasons that the offender is charged the way he's charged with this homicide. But that upon speaking, that once law enforcement, as he spoke with Chris, that and had been warned of his Miranda warnings, that he reported that he met with Matthew and Savannah, that they drove to his residence on Charlie Chan Drive, and that he purchased some marijuana. He went on to provide a version of events that are inconsistent with the evidence collected at the scene. And this is where it's so key, is that they'll be able to go to that location, and whatever story he laid out, that, oh, this is where the shots occurred outside the vehicle in this area, even in that environment, there are going to be evidence. There should be other shell casings. It depends on type. If it's a revolver or something, I haven't looked at all the information yet. I don't know what type of firearm it is yet, but as soon as I find out, we'll do some looking at that, and do some recreations on that, and for a better understanding. But that he claimed that the male victim pointed the firearm at him, and he was able to manipulate it, and with the gun going off, shooting the Savannah first, and then, of course, second time going off and hitting Matthew. And that, and so both of those supposed to be, from my first understanding, and we'll learn more from the coroner and from all the reports as we move forward, of what types of injuries, what was the distances of each of those gunshot wounds, as far as distances from what could occur outside of the vehicle versus contact or close contact inside of the vehicle. But anyway, law enforcement says that his statement is inconsistent with the gunshot wounds suffered by Matthew and Savannah and the evidence located at the crime scene. And we're going to have multiple crime scenes. So it's just not the crime scene of the vehicle, although that is one crime scene. But they can also say this could be true at the crime scene of where the actual shooting occurred and how he lays out that crime scene. So there's going to be a lot of information that will come forward as we move forward. But that law enforcement says that Chris intentionally discharged the firearm at Savannah and Matthew with the intention of causing their death. That he planned it, he executed it. It's his gun. He brought the gun to the gunfight, and he absolutely committed this horrible crime against these three victims. And if that's the case, he'll pay the price for that. And of course, in Texas, the ultimate price for that, and like I said, regardless of what these victims were doing, as far as the adults, the unborn child, absolutely innocent, and there's no excuse for such evil as that existing. But anyway, so some of the things that we have to look at when we're looking at gunshot wounds and injuries, that when you do that visual assessment of it, there's a lot of things you'll see, everything from abrasions, tattooing, soot, searing. You'll have tear in the skins. It all depends on how close that gun is to the skin and how far it's away from it. And you're able to go out there and recreate that. If you know what type of firearm it is, the caliber, that you can go in there and you can recreate this scene and show exactly, because there's certain wound characteristics that occur during these types of gunshot injuries and wounds, especially to the head, because with the bone structure and the amount of brain and muscle tissues and fluid that's contained inside the cranial vault, a lot of things occur there. And wherever that, because when you have all these expanding gases, and you have that gunshot wound, and you have that injury that occurs, it creates a tremendous amount of pressure, and you'll have back spatter that occurs. And so it depends on the caliber of the weapon. Even if you have an entry and an exit wound, you'll still have the pressures, you'll have back spatter, and then you'll have the debris that continues down range through an exit. And so there's a lot of things that goes on this type. And as soon as I understand exactly what caliber it is, I'll have a little bit more able to go into it. But you have in this slide here, it talks about contact, firm contact, and this is where the gun muzzle is held in hard pressing contact with the skin. And when it's discharged, most of the gases, gunpowders, and everything enters inside the wound channel. But there's pressures that occur. And so with those pressures, you'll see a muzzle imprint on the skin around the entrance wound due to the gas expansion and the subcutaneous tissue as it just forms to the muzzle due to all of those pressures and gases. And you'll have things that may look like a star type of injury where the skin will tear, and you'll have all different types of bone defects and things that occur. Then you have loose contact, whereas it's not as much in it. You'll still have a circular entrance injury. You'll have blackened. You'll have soot. You'll have the seared margins and also singed hair, because you'll have some of that muzzle blast outside of the contact, and it will actually burn the hair. I mean, those gases are extremely hot. And then near close range, and then we start getting in there that's generally less than 6 inches. So, you know, you're only talking about 6 inches or closer to it, and you'll start seeing a little bit different types of injuries to the skin and defects that occur. You'll have the flame burns, entrance wounds, sense hairs, soot deposit, and stippling or tattooing um, uh, starts occurring at those distances. And you're able to go out and recreate when you use a similar type of firearm. You'll have the mid-range, intermediate range, and this is where you start getting out there to those unknown, and it's very weapon specific as far as from 6 to 30 inches. A smaller handgun will not have the same type of stippling and inner energy and the powders spread and that cone forms. Every gun is different from a rifle to a pistol. And so law enforcement's able to go out there and take that and able to go out and recreate. But the greater the distance, the larger the stiffening surface is. And you can see it on the clothing, you'll see it on the skin. But then once you get outside the 30 inches, 3 feet, 4 feet, depends on the firearm, you start getting out there where you're unable. And on this one here, it's 30 inches from the skin. You'll see a grease collar around the entrance wound. And that grease collar, actually, you'll see it. It's absolutely amazing. You'll see it. And you also the abrasion ring. And I'll be able to recreate those. And I'll be sharing those with you in the coming days. But he was charged with a capital murder. And that's where a person commits a homicide um, against any of these people. And it's just not one part of it, it's any of. And so, of course, it falls within the stat of what occurred to her. And so he'll be charged with it. And do I think that he'll be facing DP? Absolutely. I believe that will be something that he will face in the future, or it will be put on the table. Now, it depends on how strong evidence they have that says um, that his story doesn't align with what the evidence is, and especially with her. Um, you know, sometimes juries they do weird things when it comes to drug dealers and or alleged drugs dealers. Um, but regardless of what his actions were, he didn't deserve this. But that um, sometimes juries do strange things. But now, when you have a expectant mother and a unborn full term child, um, like I said, I think there's going to be some issues that he'll face as he moves forward. But anyway, let's get back into chat here and see what's going on. All right. Yeah, if they increased his bond for 600 and still in custody, yeah, there's other stuff coming, I think. Um, and this is good points on both parts. That the gunshot residue, close space in car, and DNA on gun. If struggle for gun, he might have shot quickly with no time to react. And that's the thing is that the gunshot residue and gunshot residue. I don't know how often um, the victim may have handled a gun, and so there's a lot of ifty stuff there. That sometimes, let's say that he hadn't he the victim Matthew did not even handle a gun that day, but he has other firearms that he handles routinely or ammunition. That there's other ways of getting gunshot residue other than just from that, and so they'll be able to look at that, but especially the DNA on the gun if there is a struggle. That if there's none there, that will have to be some explaining, but that'll be on further into it as um, they look at and process the information and able to send the gun off to the lab and do a lot of testing and see what type of gunshot residues are on the victims. because they'll check the victims too. They'll check the hands of the victim, of just not only the offender, but of the both Matthew and Soto. Yeah. Oh, Peyton Place. Hi, Mr. Mississippi. $20 donation to the True Crime Web Foundation. Thank you. Appreciate that. And if you go to truecrimeweb.com, there's a link to our foundation there. That's our nonprofit that allows us to go out and do a lot of things for cold cases. And we've got actually some information. Ruckus will be covering interview with Larry Crum this week about some developments in Texas. Has it been confirmed by LE to be both victims behind the ear? I heard that MG had contact gunshot residue, but she did not. Don't know. And like I said, I don't know currently. Now the rumor mill's out there, but we'll have to find out. And like I said, it won't only be to the victims, but they'll process that vehicle to see what type of gunshot residue is inside the vehicle. And is it spent powders? Is it that soot? Is it unspent? Where are the shell casings? And so we'll just have to find out. Yeah. Did I get you, Peyton? Did I get you blue light? If I didn't, there you go. Thank you. And this is again, how does the offender overpower both victims unless he had a gun of his own? And like I said, there may only be one gun there. Um, I dealt a lot of times with some of these dealers, and not all dealers are armed. Some of them don't want to be around a firearm, and they take for whatever reasons. But some of them have them, and they have other people that handle the firearms. That's away from them. But absolutely, they'll know who owns that vehicle. I mean, not the vehicle, but they'll know who owns that firearm. They'll go out there, and if it has the numbers on it, they'll track it. ATF will go through that and find out exactly who is the owner. And once it's established that if the offender is lying, that and that this is not a firearm that belonged or had anything to do with the vehicle and the victims, then it's not going to look good for him. Mitzi, member for 10 months. Thank you. Appreciate it. Yes, everybody got sick. My father-in-law got out of the hospital and came home just a couple of days ago. And so, but he's down in Florida with Mrs. Steve right now being taken care of. And, but my daughter, her husband, double alt got sick. Triple alt, I think, is the only one that didn't. And I think that was part of the problem, that even getting out of the vehicle, that there was some of that had been discussed. The person that was seen on the profile, is it a guy or a girl? And so this explains a lot of that. Um, yes, I think yes that he'll be. They'll be. They'll always do evaluations and put them on certain types of watches for self harm, but also that yes, there's that possibility that someone will take it upon themselves. Yes, and anytime, regardless of where the firearm was fired, if you go by, law enforcement says that his story is inconsistent with the evidence at the crime scene. So I'm going with that. The evidence at the crime scene shows that the firearms were fired within the vehicles, and there was not an outdoor scene. because they put it in the affidavit. If it's in the affidavit, they had to swear to the judge what they were telling him was true. And if they're telling him the judge the truth, then uh, and the stories differ, then where and how can it differ? Either you're shot inside a vehicle or you're shot outside a vehicle. You're not both, and unless you have multiple gunshot injuries. Hello, everybody. Good to see y'all. I'm sorry that Mrs. Steve isn't here. Uh, Um, your daughter wondered if the offender sat in the back seat to get his weed and then shot them both using his own uh, firearm. That's possible. Um, and for the fact that if there was movement, and that's something that they will look at. Um, but there also could be that it was just through a window transaction. We just don't know right now that he may have just simply walked up to the window, and knowing that um, uh, Guerra had a history of carrying large amounts of money. We just don't know what the facts are currently. Law enforcement does. They'll be able to look at that and tell from the injuries. And if they are from a certain direction, they'll check that vehicle in specific areas. That if he was in the back seat, as you say, that if those injuries occurred, and with the back pressure, the back spatter from those injuries, there will be blood spatter and other fluids on those headrests in the opposite direction uh, of, from the entry wound. So they'll know that. And, uh, you know, and all the gunfire that I've been around, when you're in the process and you're hyped up, your body goes through certain it takes and does certain things. Your vision changes, your hearing changes, um, your mind's working at a certain speed, and there's a lot of things that goes on during that tunnel vision and during those critical moments. Um, Now, the victims may not have been able to realize it, but the offender would have. True crime web. If the medical examiner determines that Savannah was still alive when the dad met up with son, does that change his charge or felony, or is just died? Um, that is a good point because it may have. I mean, it depends on the caliber of weapon and what's that time frame and timeline. And all this, like I said, it's just unfathomable to even try to think about what was going on to these victims, um, um, and because at least one of the victims realized what was going on, because regardless of the firearm type, one of them was shot first. Now, of course, he, the offender, has his story of who got shot first. It may be absolutely true that she was shot first, but in what manner and in what way and for what reason? And so we'll have to determine that. But then again, um, it may not have, that may just be the only way that he can explain the story of how there was a fight over the gun, because you can't go with that. Yes, I was fighting him, gun went off, shot him in the head. He continued to fight, and then I shot her accidentally. So there may be a reason for his story. We'll just have to see. Yes, and Anna says that close range woman shot first, lousy am or on purpose. Um, I would, if you go by what law enforcement says, this was on purpose. That his story is not what the evidence show. And if that's the case, that could have been from the back seat or could have been through a window, either or. We just don't know, um, but we will find out. Let's see here. Yes, they all those streets out there had movie star names on them. That when you look as you go through the neighborhood and look, you can see all the street signs. Steve, it seems someone else was in that truck. Can they be charged also? Yes, and that may still be something that can happen. You know, we're a long way from what the window of opportunity of what's going to happen here and how cooperative the offenders are going to be, and um, and who all was in there in that vehicle. And I'm pretty sure law enforcement knows exactly who is in there, either through their different phone devices, communications, for the fact that um, the father said that he called him, his son called him, and of course, all that information is going to be there. Who else did he call? Who else was near him when the call came in? Who did he text or did he communicate with anyone else? Um, what devices are riding together in that vehicle from that geofence warrant that I would assume they have, so that they'll be able to build that um, detailed charges as they go to court. Yes. So he accidentally shot two. That's from his storyline. Just that by itself. If you didn't consider anything else, that you have a gun during a struggle and it accidentally, I don't know how many times the gun discharged, but if it only discharged twice and both of those resulted in head injuries, yeah, I don't think so. Does it say? No, I don't know exact address, but his cooperation he'll have to show, and if he's cooperating, telling, and that may be that it doesn't match up with that crime scene either. Kamala, good to see you. You're not late. Gail Hurd gifted one True Crime Web membership. Thank you. Appreciate that. Steve, what do you think the father was doing in the video that the police was released? I think that in a high tense relation uh, uh, ships, that when you call people, that in those moments of when, oh, I've done something bad, and dad, mom, you ain't gonna believe this, and I need your help, and father came. But I think he came, he looked, realized that, oh, yes, you told me the truth. And he took the towel. Now, did he take the firearm with the towel or did he just wipe the car down? Law enforcement be able, they didn't charge, I don't think there's any charges right now about where the weapon is, who the weapon or where it is currently. I haven't seen that yet. It may be out there, I just unaware, but that's going to play a huge part in it, that if he did attempt to destroy or hide any evidence, those could be additional charges. Southern Gal True Crime, good to see you. What the bag? Trying to get caught up here, guys. Appreciate y'all being with us. What kind of testing are you going to do on this case? I'll go out and find some mediums to shoot with certain types of. As soon as I find out more about the weapon and what type of firearm and what caliber, as I find that out, I'll try to go out there and I'll show you some of the bracketing and different types of tests of. Whereas you'll be able to see the abrasion rings, the tattooing, the soot. Um, the sear skin, I'll have to see how, but there's certain, I might uh, be able to take care of that also, and show some of the of what happens at contact, near contact, gunshot wounds. Probably be some of the testing I'll be looking at doing. Grace says, I miss Mrs. Steve. I do too. It's only been a few hours, but I miss her. I drove all, I left late last night and drove all night and got here. But we've talked a couple of times on the phone and been messaging each other back and forth. Well, does it go all the way through the head? Depends on the caliber of the firearm and type of projectile. Hello. Everybody misses Mrs. Steve. I do. I do. Kamala Norris, gifted 5 True Crime Web memberships. Thank you. Appreciate that. And no doubt that Chris will be living at rest of his number of days, Livingston, Texas, which is a beautiful, but not on D Road. We'll have to see what happens. I mean, I don't know. They may be already announced, but I just don't know. And this is where some of the storyline will have to figure out because as we discussed the other night, the communications between the dealer, you know, and like I said, Matthew didn't deserve this, but uh, whoever, what was the contact, when was the meeting place, when was the meeting occur, when did the devices come together, where were they at when they came together, was were they in a vehicle, was there movement, was there other things that occurred, did he force them at gunpoint to drive to a remote location and where certain where the homicides occurred. All of that will be analyzed, looked at, because uh, until law enforcement has all that information and looking at it and see what when you add up all the evidence, what does it tell you? You know, it can be something walking up to the window, shooting, getting in the vehicle, forcing them to drive somewhere, committing the crime, doing the robbery, and then moving on. We just don't know right now. Olivia, too, $5 super sticker. Thank you. Appreciate that. Appreciate all y'all's support. Uh-oh, Susan's confused. What are we confused about? Let me know. I hope I didn't confuse you. I'm sorry if I did. Um, okay, Susan says he was shot accidentally during a gun struggle, but he was gotten with a contact wound. And that's where law enforcement, like I said, when an offender tells you during an interview, you know, they have an agenda. This offender has an agenda. He has to prove and say that or tell, and truth or otherwise. That's where the evidence from the crime scene and within the vehicle is so critical and so important, that this offender says this is what happened. Law enforcement says, from what he's told us and what the evidence tells us, he's lying. And that's what I get from when I read that affidavit, that somebody's lying and it's not the evidence. And so, uh, if you go by that, then of course there's nothing accidental. There was no struggle. That one victim was shot, and then the other victim was shot. Yeah, in the culture of and relationships, you know, um, uh, at that high risk of doing that type of activities, absolutely unimaginable. Josh the Posh, 14 months hitting the thumbs up. Excellent. I'm glad you feel better. I'm feeling better too. I'm a little bit hoarse. Still have a little bit of congestion, but nothing like I was a few weeks ago. Not a few weeks ago, just last week. Oh my goodness. Couldn't even talk. Steve, how long do you think it would be before they release the videos of interrogation interviews? It depends on what the DA decides and how fast it moves through and what type of negotiations. You know, uh, does he want to just put an end to this and fully cooperate? Um, but it will be after the trial, if there is a trial. I'm glad I made some sense and clarified some issues. Thank you. Yes, I mean, once the heart stops, um, you can suffer head injuries, and that's something that the evidence within the car will show us. How long was that heart pumping? And as long as the heart's pumping and oxygen is in the blood, that there can be, it can last. I don't know what the exact time frame is, but there could be a certain amount of time frame. But it's just terrible. Let's see here. In the press conference last night, Ellie said they weren't looking for any more suspects. Does that mean if there was someone else in the truck, they're just not releasing the name? That'd be correct. Um, and you know, I expect there was someone else in the vehicle, and they just whatever going to eat the last of the black and peas, greens, and cornbread. Excellent. Yeah, legalization of marijuana. We'll have to see where it goes. Yes, we spoke about that the other night, that there was movement of the towel in the truck, and I agree that there appears to be at least a third. And was law enforcement, when they said that we want two persons of interest, was that a shout out to the other person in the vehicle? We know you're out there. We just want two, and so give us a call. Don't know um, if that's the case or not. Why do you think the prosecution is considering bail for the son seems crazy to me. Maybe just to get him to talk. I don't know. Um, uh, Saying and getting is two different things. All right. All right. Well, guys, I appreciate everybody being here tonight. And but everybody, we're feeling a little bit better. I hope everybody's New Year is going well. I'm glad that everybody's feeling a little bit better from whatever's going around. I thank everybody for being here, um, and I'll be working on some CSI stuff on this. Um, and we have a cowboy hat waiting for you in Texas. And thank you. It looks like I'll be out in Texas the last week of January. And like I said, Larry has an interview coming up with hopefully with a major news carrier regarding Amber. She's getting finally the ball's rolling, attention's coming to it, and we just had the 40-year anniversary of her being missing. And so as we move forward with the case, I should be out in Texas at the end of January. And I've got to pick up a chair out there too, hopefully, or find one. But I want to thank everybody for all y'all support. Blue Light for everybody that supports us in so many different ways. We thank y'all. Couldn't do this without you, and look forward to the new year. And I should be back with y'all in a day or two. Y'all stay safe out there, and we'll see you soon. Let me. All right. See y'all soon, guys. Bye-bye.